before maps and compasses, before men charted the edge of the world. There was a legend whispered across the temple of Egypt, a place beyond the Red Sea, overflowing with gold, ivory, and trees that bled incense. They called it Punt, Netjer, the land of the gods. It was more than just a destination. It was a devotion made real, a bridge between earth and the divine. Pharaohs didn't just send ships there for trade, they sent them seeking connection. As if by reaching Punt, they might touch the very birthplace of creation. From the ports of the Nile, Egyptian ships carved cedar drift into the unknown. Sailors watched the coastline fade behind them, their eyes fixed on the horizon no one had seen and lived to describe. They carried gold, wine, linen, and hope. Ahead lay land painted in myth, where incense trees glowed like fire in the sun, and rivers shimmered with the reflection of sacred animals. When the queen Hatshepsut sent her great expedition to Punt around 1470 BCE, she immortalized it on the walls of her temple at Deir el-Bahri. You can still see it, ships piled high with myrrh, baboons, and trees uprooted to be replanted in Egypt's soil. And in those carvings, the queen of Punt stands proudly beside her king, surrounded by huts built on stilts beside a lush river. It was a world of abundance, almost divine, I'd say. And yet, no one knows where it truly was. For thousands of years, scholars, explorers, and dreamers have searched across Somalia, Eritrea, Sudan, and even Yemen. And still, no one can say for certain Punt vanished not with war, but with a mystery, a real kingdom that slipped into the myth, a name carved in stone but never found in the sand. And that's where our story begins, between history and legend, between the known world and the one Egypt called home to the gods. The story of Punt begins not with discovery, but with devotion. Long before Hatshepsut's grand expedition, Egyptian scripts from the Old Kingdom were merely recording a mysterious land of the gods, far to the south and east, a place where incense flowed like rivers and sunlight danced on gold. For the Egyptians, Punt wasn't just a trading partner, it was a sacred ground. They believed it was the home to their gods, the source of life-giving myrrh used in temple rituals and in embalming the dead. To sail there was to trace the divine back to its origin. By around 2500 BC, during the reign of Pharaoh Sahura, Egypt's earliest known sea voyages were launched from the ports near the Red Sea. Myrrh, and Wadi al-Jaraf, ships built from imported cedar woods, lashed with ropes and guided only by the stars and the wind, set out across a sea no Egyptian had ever crossed before. Imagine the moment, the air thick with resin and salt, the crew priests, sailors, traders chanting prayers to Hathor, goddess of the Red Sea. The ships pushed off at dawn, their sails swelling towards a horizon filled with both promise and fear. Weeks later, those same ships returned, heavy with treasure, frankincense, ebony, ivory, and exotic skins, gifts from a land beyond imagination. Reliefs from Sahura's temple showed the triumph, puntets with braided hair, leading animals unknown to Egypt, and offering branches of incense trees as tribute. These weren't mere exchanges of goods, they were exchange of worlds. Egypt had reached beyond its deserts, forging a bond that was spiritual as it was economic. Punt became both a source of wealth and a symbol of divine favor, a place where heaven seemed to touch the earth. Centuries later, the fascination would only deepen. Pharaohs after Sahura sent more expeditions, each returning with more proof that Punt was real and more mystery about where exactly it lay. By the time of Queen Hatshepsut, Punt became a legend, a kingdom remembered in incense smoke and temple prayers. And she would be the one to chase that legend back into the sea. When Hatshepsut's ship reached the fabulous coast of Punt, They didn't find the barren land many had feared. They found paradise. The carvings on the walls of Deir el-Bahri tells the story in breathtaking details. The only visual record we have of Punt. Lush trees lines the shore. Stilt houses rise above a winding river. And the king and the queen of Punt stand before the Egyptian envoys, draped in gold and wrapped in patent linen. The queen, Ati, is depicted with striking features, a proud face, broad frame, and jewels that glimmer across her chest. Behind her, servants carry baskets of goods so rich they seem almost symbolic. The Egyptians had finally arrived in the land of the gods, and what they saw confirmed the legends. There were groves of myrrh and frankincense, trees that bled perfume when cut. There were leopards, giraffes, and sacred baboons, animals foreign to Egypt but sacred to their mythology. Ivory tusk, gold, ebony, and aromatic resins were traded for Egyptian wine, linen, and jewelry. The reliefs shows Egyptians carefully uprooting entire incense trees, carrying them back on their ships to be replanted in Egyptian soil. An early act of transplanting not just trade but culture and faith. For the Egyptians, myrrh was divine. It was used in religious ceremonies, medicines, and embleming of kings. To bring it home was to bring a piece of heaven itself. What makes these carvings even more powerful is what they reveal about the people of Punt themselves. They weren't primitive or dependent. They were wealthy coastal civilization, well-dressed, well-fed, and well-organized. Their land was fertile, their rivers navigable, their trade strong. They spoke as equal, not as subjects. To the Egyptians, this was proof that Punt was not just a partner, it was a reflection of something divine. In their theology, Punt was seen as a place of origins, perhaps even the home of their gods. To reach Punt was to return to where life begins. And as Hatshepsut's fleet loaded their ships with treasure and set sail back to Egypt, they were not just carrying goods, they were carrying a connection between two ancient worlds separated by sea, yet joined by faith and exchange. But the story doesn't end with triumph, because what followed was confusion, a mystery that would last millennia. How could a land so real, so rich, so documented simply disappear? The Egyptians left behind exquisite details about the land of Punt, but somehow not the one thing we needed the most: its location. No coordinates, no direction, only art and pottery. And so the search for Punt became one of the archaeologists' longest running riddles. Centuries after Hatshepsut's fleet vanished from records, scholars began tracing her path. The carvings at Deir el-Bahri describes a lush, river-fed land, teeming with palms and incense trees, a place reachable by sea from the Red Sea ports of Egypt. This was the first clue. Punt had to lie somewhere along the African coast or the Arabian Peninsula. At first, many believed Punt was Arabia, modern Yemen or Oman, lands known for frankincense and myrrh. Others argued for Sudan or Eritrea, where the Nile meets the Red Sea. But as more evidence emerged, the compass began to turn towards the Horn of Africa. In 2010, a team of scientists studied and mummified baboons once fought for Punt to Egypt as sacred gifts. The teeth, still holding trace minerals, were compared to modern samples across Africa and Arabia. The results pointed clearly to Eritrea and Somalia. The baboons had come from Africa. Punt was real and it was African. That revelation changed everything. It aligned with what the carvings had always suggested: palm trees, huts on stilts, riverbanks lined with reeds. Even the physical features of the Puntite rulers resembled the people of Horn today. But the mystery didn't end here. If Punt was in the Horn of Africa, why did it disappear so completely? Trade with Egypt flourished for centuries, and then nothing. No ships, no records, no ruins with names. Some archaeologists believe climate change played its hand. Shifting winds, drought and collapsing Red Sea trade routes may have turned once fertile coastland into the desert. Others think Punt simply evolved, merging into later African kingdoms like Dimt and eventually Aksum, whose people continued the same maritime traditions and incense trade that had once defined Punt. And yet, something about Punt remains untouchable, as if part of it was never meant to be found. Its name, meaning God's land, feels more like a prayer than a place. Perhaps the Egyptians saw in Punt was not just geography, but memory, a symbol of where they believed life began, a reflection of their own origins written in another people's soil. Punt was real, but it was also sacred, and sometimes the sacred chooses silence over survival. The last echo of Punt faded quietly into the history. After nearly 1,000 years of contact, the records fall silent. No more ships carved into temple walls, no more lists of treasures brought from the land of the gods. By the time Egypt's new kingdom waned, so too did the memory of the world beyond the sea. It wasn't a sudden fall, it was a slow fading, the kind only time and neglect can bring. Egypt's power fractured under foreign rules. The port of Myrrh and Wadi al-Jarf, once alive with song and salis, were abandoned. The cedar ships that once carried gold and myrrh across the Red Sea rotted where they rested before. Trade stopped not with war, but with silence. For centuries, Punt had been Egypt's divine mirror, a reflection of its prosperity and its faith. But when Egypt turned inwards, that reflection dimmed. The priests still burned incense in their temples, but whispered prayers to the god of the east. But the scent that rose into the air came from the other lands now. Arabia, India, not Punt. Somewhere across the sea, the land itself was changing too. The coast of the Horn of Africa grew drier. Rivers shrank. The forests that once bled with incense gave way to grassland and desert. The monsoon winds shifted, altering the Red Sea's current, making voyages longer, harsher, and more uncertain. The same winds that guided the Egyptians home now turned against them. But perhaps Punt didn't die. Perhaps it transformed. The culture that thrived there may have evolved into a kingdom of Dimt and later Aksum, both inheriting Punt's command of trade and the Red Sea. They built cities of stone, minted coins, and carried the same incense and ivory that once filled the Hatshepsut's ship. Punt may have vanished by name, but its heartbeat carried on through them, disguised as new language, new gods, and new borders. And still, in Egypt, Punt remained sacred. Even when the geography was lost, the idea endured. The belief in a paradise across the water and a place where God and men once walked together. Every time a priest lit a stick of myrrh, the smoke curled like memory, rising towards the sky, reaching for a land that had slipped beyond the map. Punt's disappearance wasn't a tragedy of conquest. It was something gentler, more haunting, a civilization that simply drifted back into the myth it came from. For the Egyptians, Punt was never just a name carved into the stone. It was a vision, a reminder that somewhere beyond the horizon lay the echo of paradise. When they lost Punt, they didn't lose a trade route. They lost a reflection of their own soul. Even now, thousands of years later, the mystery endures. We can trace the ships, the carvings, the goods that crossed the Red Sea. But we can't trace the feelings those voyages carried. To them, reaching Punt was not just commerce, it was communication. Every voyage was a prayer in motion, a journey towards something holy and familiar. Archaeologists can now follow the clues: the baboon bones, the incense resin, the shared DNA across the Horn of Africa. But the truth of Punt still slips like light across the water. Maybe that's because Punt was never only a place. Maybe it was an idea, the yearning of one civilization to find another. Maybe that's because Punt was never only a place. Maybe it was an idea, the yearning of one civilization to find another, to seek the divine in human form. And in that way, Punt never truly vanished. It lives on in every culture that reaches beyond its borders, in every traveler who sails towards the unknown, believing that sometimes sacred waits on the other side. The Egyptian believed Punt was the land of the gods. Perhaps that they were really chasing was not gold or incense, but a memory of where they came from and who they were meant to be. The world may never uncover the exact soil of Punt, but its legacy still breathes in the scent of burning myrrh, in the rhythm of trade winds, in the shared humanity that connects coast and cultures. A kingdom that once gave light to the gods and gave wonders to those who remembers. Some stories are not meant to end. They are meant to remind us that what is divine is never lost, only waiting to be found again. Thank you for watching CTT Stories, ladies and gentlemen. The Egyptians called it land of the gods, a place they could sail to, but never truly hold. If this story reached you, help it reach someone else as well. Let their ship sail again, carried this time by memory, not wind. Subscribe for more stories carved from time. Stay curious, stay human, and remember, every myth begins somewhere real. And I'll see you in the next one.